people? It's your girl here, Chauncey K. Robinson, aka Twisted CKR, and I am doing a review and breakdown and analysis of episode 1 and 2 of HBO Max's The Last of Us. Overall, I am really actually enjoying this series a lot more than I thought I was going to enjoy it. I'm always skeptical of watching a show or a movie where one of the main characters or the main character is a younger child person, because I think sometimes people don't always get the writing right with children characters, and you can have it so they kind of suck up all the air in the room when it comes to plot and things. But I think The Last of Us has actually done really well with their younger characters, two in particular, Ellie being one of them, but the other being Sarah, Joel's first daughter, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But overall, I am very much enjoying The Last of Us. I think it's a gorgeous looking show, which is kind of hard to do with apocalyptic movies sometimes, right? To have the beauty be shown in the destruction, and this movie does it so well. I am also someone who, although I did not play or have not played yet The Last of Us as a video game, which is what this show is based off of, I do know a lot of the plot of the video game because I have watched others play it, and I looked up some of it too because I was interested in it because I have Xbox Game Pass. So, I was at one time it was on there, so I was like, do I want to play this game? So I did look up stuff that happened in it, so I am aware of it. And so I was also interested in how they were going to adapt it because of the fact that we all know video game adaptations can be hit or miss. And sometimes that hit or miss isn't always the fault of the adaptation. Sometimes it's the fault of the fan base and their expectations. This is particularly the case when it comes to the Resident Evil franchise. But I think The Last of Us is doing it right on many fronts. There's compelling characters. It has the potential of really great world building, although from what I'm seeing, it is very much sticking very close to the plot and the tone of the video game, but I do think that there is room to expand on that while still staying true to the video game itself as well. And I hope that they, although they're being very true to the cinematography of it and the characters, I hope they don't let that stifle them to not expand on or switch up for the show, which I actually think we've seen in episode 1 and 2 that they have switched up some stuff for the better when it comes to the lore of The Last of Us. So let's talk about episode 1. Episode 1 I felt was amazing. I feel like that cinched the deal for me in terms of watching this whole series, or at least all of season 1. And that was because it really laid the groundwork in such a tangible way of how we get to where we are when the show and the game jumps like 20 years in the future, right? And so I felt like that was necessary. I was a little worried that it would feel like almost kind of filler, but I feel like the show, in being very close to the adaptation of the video game, did it well. What happened in episode 1 is very much kind of the opening scenes of the video games. But let's talk about the show itself. I'll get towards like some of the changes with the video game and stuff like that towards the end. But I really want to focus on the show itself because I do think it's a show for both fans of the video game and new people who are totally new to it, right? So I felt like the episode 1 was quality. We got to know Joel, but more importantly, we got to know the character, the short-lived character that, in my opinion, stole the show or stole that episode, which was Joel's daughter, Sarah, played by Nico Parker, who is Thandie Newton's daughter. If you didn't know that, she is Thandie Newton's daughter. And oh my gosh, I mean, once you're told that, all you got to do is do a comparison picture, and it's like Thandie spit that girl out. They look so much alike. Gorgeous, gorgeous. And, sometimes I'm not for the Nepo baby thing where, someone seems like they're in there because they were related to someone. But, oh my gosh, Nico, oh my gosh, she is such a great young actress. I hope to see her in so much more stuff. I was made a believer from her playing Sarah, y'all. I almost to the point where I was so like, well, maybe she survives. Even though if she did survive, they'd have to age her 20 years or whatever. So we wouldn't have gotten Nico. But that's how well they did the Sarah character, where which can be hard to do when if you're familiar with the game, Sarah doesn't survive. This because Sarah's death plays a very big part on the Joel we see 20 years later, right? So Sarah's not going to make it. If you're new to the show, you might not have known that Sarah wasn't going to make it. But if you saw a lot of the promotion and stuff, you didn't see Sarah the promotion. You saw another young girl, Ellie. So you kind of get a sense that maybe Sarah's not around, right? And so for me to know that this character probably was not long for this TV world, they did such a good job of making you love her, making you want to see the world through her eyes, and you very much see the world through her eyes in a very compelling way. And I just absolutely thought the structure of this first episode and showing the love that Sarah has for her father, and through that love for her father, you see Joel as who he is as well, and some of the remnants that you see later on. And I thought that was a really good thing they did. They could have made it so that the whole Sarah Joel, the beginning of the apocalypse outbreak situation, lasted maybe 10 minutes of the whole first episode and kind of jumped right into the 20 years. But this show, I want to call it a movie because the first episode was like an hour and a half, so it was like the length of a movie. This episode really sat with the beginning. It sat with the idea of looking at how chaotic, of how this all hit things so quickly, and that sense of dread, of terror, and it really just it milked it in all the right ways. So I totally love that beginning. And when Sarah ultimately met her end, I was quite sad. I mean, you felt that scene between Joel and Sarah. Kudos to the actors, Pedro and Nico. It was just amazing. And oh my gosh, R.I.P. Sarah. I actually kind of hope we get some flashbacks with Sarah. Maybe before, through Joel's memory, because that's how much you came to love that character. So that was really well done. And the outbreak really showed you the grossness that you're going to be dealing with in this show. I love zombie pictures and things like that for what they can represent, right? Zombies a lot of time represent the question of sickness, the question of chaos, societal upheaval. And when you deal with those themes, I think horror allows you to deal with those themes, those real relevant themes in a very effective way. So I'm always down for that. Although when it comes to zombie pictures or outbreak pictures, they can be very gross to the point where I don't always seek them out. And when they showed some of the initial ways of those tentacles coming out of people's mouths and stuff, I was like, oh. I'm not gonna lie, I squirmed through a good chunk of the first episode and the second episode, but in a good way. Not to the point where I was like, I can't watch this, but to the point where I'm like, this is very effective. Now let's get into part 2 of episode 1, right? So that happens with Joel, and then they time jump. Just like the game, time jumps 20 years later with Joel. Seemingly after, the outbreak, the government, the military has somewhat kind of gotten stuff under control, but not really though. And that's always the case, right? Cities have been bombed. There's safe havens. There's safe havens where people who aren't infected go. And we see it has gotten cold blooded, right? We see this little kid come and we think, they're going to be given all the candy they want and stuff's going to be great. And then the next scene, his dead body is being thrown into the fire by Joel. He went, and I thought that was a really good contrast, that one minute he's holding his daughter and so affected and so emotional. And then 20 years later, he's holding the body of a young kid and just unceremoniously just chucking it into the fire pit. And I think that was a really good contrast of showing you just where Joel's head is at this point. And we see, he's taking drugs, he's drinking a lot. He still has that watch that Sarah gave him, even though it doesn't work anymore. Some butterflies that reminds him of Sarah. So there's remnants of his trauma and his love for his daughter. His brother is nowhere to be found, but we know he is looking for his brother. Who has seemingly kind of joined the resistance, but then kind of left the resistance. We don't know where the brother is. So that's one plot line that we get a little bit of a glimpse of. And we also meet Tess. Tess being Joel's sort of girlfriend, but also like smuggling partner, because Joel was, he kind of became a smuggler. He's doing what he has to do to survive. Survive for what necessarily? Because he's so, done with life seemingly, but still doing it. I think part of him surviving probably has to do with not wanting to let Sarah down, so he's just kind of kept going, even though it doesn't seem like he's really truly living. But then again, who is truly living in this really sad environment that we're in now? And so we see that Joe's a smuggler, and they're trying to get a battery because they want to be able to, I think, run a car in order to find Joel's brother and see what's going on and other things and smuggle stuff. And this leads us to Ellie and the situation with Ellie and her being held by the leader of the Fireflies, which is a resistance group. And this is our first meeting with Ellie. I have to admit, initially, I kind of wasn't feeling Ellie. I thought they were kind of falling immediately into the smart aleck kid trope that can get very one-noted after a while. And I'm going to be honest, for most of the first episode, I felt that way. So I wasn't really as engaged with Ellie, I should say, in the first episode. And part of that probably was because they did such a good job with the character of Sarah, where you're almost kind of like, I would rather Sarah. They should have switched. And maybe that was purposeful to make us question how Joel will ever get to the point where he feels some type of connection with a character, Ellie, who seems so different from the Sarah we got to know from the first half of it. So, things happen. They end up, agreeing to smuggle Ellie across, but then we find out Ellie is infected, even though she hasn't turned. And that pretty much leaves the first episode at a cliffhanger. We get into episode 2, and basically Tess and Joel are trying to decide what to do with Ellie. In the previous episode, Joel, I keep wanting to call him Pedro because it's played by Pedro. He's so awesome. Pretty much beat this guy to death. I think he had a PTSD moment, of course, and kind of got thrown back to when he lost Sarah, and that's where that came from. And so, we're at that. But before episode 2 starts, we actually get a very cool before the outbreak starts scene with Dr. Ratna. And I thought this was a very powerful scene. What a powerful character. There are so many characters I've seen so far where they play the smallest part, but they're so impactful. And that could be so hard for a show to do. And this show with Sarah and then Dr. Ratna being the scientist who basically sees the end coming, and she's like, I'd like to be with my family because this is it, and her hands shaking around the tea. That was such a powerful opening scene for episode 2, with them going back to 2003 and seeing how that played out. So you see even more of where all of this was coming from, but it still left a very big mystery. You just know here's another place that was affected, but how did that even start there? And I like that for the world building aspect of it. I think this episode also gave us a chance to get to know Ellie a little bit more with her layers. There were some comedic moments. She's still a kid, very much so. She's still guarded, but she does have some vulnerability. We saw her and Tess, and I'll talk about Tess in a second, somewhat bonding, which was cool to see, I thought. We saw the two of them kind of coming together, and you also got to know Tess a little bit more. Tess was kind of a hard ass in the first episode, and now you're seeing not necessarily a motherly quality, but a quality of, okay, this girl might be the cure maybe there's some hope in this world, right? And so you see Ellie kind of take a like to her, which also kind of is a great contrast because she still hasn't really decided if she likes Joel, but that's who she ends up having to be there with, even though she doesn't want to leave Tess behind, right? And I think this showed a little bit of Ellie somewhat looking for a mother figure. You know, clearly she lost her biological mother early on, and she wants some sort of connection. So, and we got to know a little bit more of why or how Ellie got infected, even though I'm sure that's not the whole story. And so this particular episode gave us a look at the clickers. And oh man, are those things scary. Wow. I mean, I think episode 2 really drove home the horror factor and how scary a lot of these creatures are. And I love that we're already getting a sense that there's different types of infected. And the clickers being one of them. They can't see, but they can hear, and they look like that. Oh my gosh. Once again, I was squirming. I was just like, these things are gross. I mean, let's talk about the fact that there's a chance that stuff like this could happen to us, or that it already happens in the real world of like nature with insects. And we have like those zombie fungi that churn animals into zombies just to basically use them for their bodies and nutrients. And it's not supposed to happen in humans, but basically the whole aspect of this show is that it ends up happening to humans. And actually, in episode 1, they do a great opening with a 1968 talk show of this happening. Great groundwork, great lore, saying that this was happening in the making for decades, right? And so we see the end result with that, and oh my gosh, that scene was so intense, and you felt the fear of it. But that scene was crazy intense. And then Tess gets bitten. Did I think we were going to get rid of Tess this early in the I wanted to say game, this early in the show? Not exactly. I thought we were going to have at least another episode of two with Tess. So it was kind of interesting to see this happen. The kiss with the infected, those things coming, those things like that. It was like that. Coming out of that thing's mouth. This is gross, but in a wonderful way. And it was sad. But I also enjoyed the fact that, Tess wanted some redemption. At first, I'll be honest, for most of the episode, I was wondering if we could trust Tess. I was like, well, maybe she's going to turn on her eventually, try to sell her to the highest bidder for Ellie or something like to Ellie, or whatnot. And she really was genuine and wanting to hopefully get Ellie to whoever she needed to get to in order to maybe help find a cure. And that was good. I felt like that was really good. And in a way, once you realize that she's trustable, or, you could trust her, I was almost kind of sad that we lost her so early on. The actress did a really good job, and it served the purpose of letting us see how people can get infected. That it's not necessarily like with the zombies of, other shows and stuff where they just tear you apart. Yes, you get bitten, but there's also a very kind of subtle way that this happens, like fungi growth. Oh, right, like when someone gets fungus or something, how it just grows slowly over the food and stuff. That's how this is, and that's just so gross to me. Ugh. I am like grossed out by this show, but I love the storytelling. I'm warring within myself every time I sit down to watch an episode so far. But I thought episode 2 was very solid. And it basically gets us to the point of the story where now Joel and Ellie pretty much have to talk to each other. And we'll see how that goes. Now, I think, of course, the show is going to get compared to Walking Dead, because Walking Dead for some time has been the quintessential zombie infected type world building show that so many people reference to. And is there similarities? Yes, there are, but I also think that the show very much stands on its own with its own aesthetic, particularly with the infected. This is a whole new ball game. This is a whole new ball game of what it means to be zombified and all this other stuff. That's very different than what we've seen before. And I think that if they lean into that more, we will have something that's very much unique that will stand on its own. a difference that they made from the video game the to the actual screen. It's actually two differences. One is the difference of how Tess died. I believe in the video game, Tess did not get infected. She died by the military or whatnot that was chasing them. In this particular case, they made it so she died by, or, changed by infection. So that was an interesting change. Do I think it was necessary? I mean, well, I guess it had to happen that way since the military isn't even following them in this iteration yet, right? The other very significant, I think, change that they made was the fact that they're not doing the spores thing. I believe in the video game, there was a thing with spores where the infected, the fungi people or whatever, gave off spores. And if you in the air. There were spores in the air. And if you breathed in these spores, you could also become infected. And I think that was a mechanism in the game, which makes sense. Don't walk into this corner. There's spores. You can't really necessarily do that in, I think, in a live action. I don't think that would be very believable because let's just be honest, if this thing spread by air, everyone would need to be walking around with face masks. I mean, I just can't imagine that if something's airborne that you can't put on a mask. Um, anyway, reference message. But yes, I think they changed that for that very reason. I think that was a good choice, and they made it so that the infected are very much connected through like the tentacles of the fungi, the roots, and that if some of the roots or whatnot, if they're alive, if they're still fruitful or whatever, can sense something happening somewhere, it alerts like this crazy fungi network the other infected in another area. And I just thought that was so scary. That is so scary because when it comes to zombie lore, right? You have it so that, okay, don't make a noise because they start to hear you or whatever like that. They'll come after you. But a lot of time it's those within your vicinity. If they hear the noise, that's that. Can you imagine the idea if you stepped on a crack or like a plant limb or something that the infected or the zombies from like a mile away could sense that and know that someone who wasn't one of them was there, and it would alert this whole ecosystem of these things to come after you? I mean, it almost seems kind of helpless. And that is so terrifying to me. So I thought that was a really good addition. And I'm interested to see how they play with that. This idea that they're all connected in sort of this hive mind, right? Because with zombies, there's not really a lot of time we haven't seen them with a hive mind mentality, especially not in The Walking Dead. It has been done before, zombies having hive mind mentality. I forget what movie it was, but that has been sort of a thing where there's something of them all having kind of similar goals. But in terms of like actually sharing like messaging and brain power and moving like a wave, I think that's kind of a newer thing. And so I thought that was a great new addition to the lore of The Last of Us. Overall, episode 1 and 2 were awesome. I'm really enjoying the show thus far, and I'm excited to see what new characters we come across and, more of the story with Ellie and Joel. I think Ellie showed herself to have a few more layers than just the wise Alec kid, so I'm glad that they kind of broke out of that a bit, and I hope to see more of that come into fruition as we go along with her. And also Joel's story as well. All right, Twisted People, that is my episode 1 and 2 talk, analysis, review of The Last of Us. Let me know what your thoughts are. Who's your favorite character thus far? Are you loving Ellie? Could you take it or leave Ellie? Let me know. Comment down below. And stay twisted out there.